We're going to talk about, we're going to keep on with our response to prayer. I think I said this was our last week. We're going to have one more week. So, surprise, surprise. I know. I said, we're going to do 2 this week, and then I get started on 1, and I'm like, oh my goodness, there's so many slides. I don't even know if we'll make it through all this one this week. So it just never fails to get into it, and we just, that's what happens. So we're going to talk about response to prayer. We've been talking about actions. We talked about direct action. We talked about inaction, indirect action. And we talked about counsel and information. And now we're going to talk about this one, actions in the spiritual realm. Maybe you've never thought about this one. But when we pray, does God do stuff behind the scenes in response to the prayer that is unseen? So that's what we're going to look at today, because there is a lot of examples of this and some very specific ones you're going to be familiar with. So we're going to just talk about that a little bit today and what happens in the unseen areas when we pray. Okay? Kind of interesting. So, prayer causes action in the spiritual realm. We know that because the Bible records a whole lot of it. I'm going to show you a number of examples today. We won't go through every example because we'd be here for weeks and weeks, but we're going to show you a couple big ones that will probably register that you'll remember. These prayers have elements that are concealed, which means they would not be fully known if God did not tell us. In other words, we pray on something and God does something behind the scenes, and we would honestly not know that took place if it wasn't some messenger or if it wasn't some information that God also said, oh, by the way, here's what I did behind the scenes. Otherwise, you'd never know. You would have no idea that actually took place or God answered in that way. So maybe not fully known. There may be actions taken that we never know. There you go. Things that God does in response to a prayer that you offered, and you go, oh, God didn't respond. He didn't answer. He didn't do anything with this. And actually, he did. You just didn't get informed or get to see the outcome of it here. And this can include things like an angelic assistance or engagement. I'll show you some examples of this, where God, for whatever reason, decides to use some of the heavenly host to do things in response to prayer. I'll show you that. Could involve a demonic battle or some kind of an exorcism or removal of an evil entity that's battling. Okay, these are all things that are in the Bible. Or it could be just some form of spiritual warfare that God engages in through a number of means on your behalf because you prayed. Okay, so I'm going to show you some examples of that today, and we'll see how far we make it, because there was a number of pieces to this I wanted to show you. So let's talk about this one first, the angelic response or assistance. You think about, you pray, what does God do with that in his courtroom, in his realm where he's at, in his throne room? How does he respond? We always think that we know God could just respond directly, right? I mean, he could just do everything himself. He doesn't need a heavenly host to do anything. But he uses a heavenly host because that's what he wants to do. And sometimes he uses them in prayer. And so I'm going to show you a couple of examples. So here's one in Daniel. Okay, you've definitely probably heard these verses. So Daniel says, now I was still speaking and praying and confessing my sin and the sin of my people Israel and presenting my plea before Yahweh my God on behalf of the holy mountain of God. And I was still speaking in prayer. So he's praying, and what happens? He says, the man Gabriel, whom I had seen in the vision previously, in my weariness touched me at the time of the evening offering. So what's he doing? He's praying, and what happens? Angel shows up. Okay? Gabriel shows up. Goes on to say, and he instructed me, and he spoke with me, and he said, Daniel, I have now come out to teach you understanding. At the beginning of your pleas for mercy, a word went out, and now I have come to declare it, for you are highly esteemed. So it's kind of an interesting thing that the angel says, or Gabriel says here, because he says, when the word went out, when your pleas went out, what happened?
His prayer was heard.
We heard it, and I've come because of your words. That's where I've been sent. You need understanding. You're highly esteemed in the court of heaven, and here I am to help you. Kind of interesting that God would send an angel in response to his pleas for mercy in his prayer. So David had been praying, and God sent Gabriel to provide information, revelation to Daniel. That's what's ultimately coming, is this revealing of what's going to take place. Okay? But the thing I want you to make the connection is Daniel was praying. He was confessing sin. He was saying, God, I don't know, we're in exile. Please help us. What's going to happen? What's going on? And what does God do? Here you go. Kind of reminds me of Abraham. Was Abraham highly esteemed in God's mind, do you think? Remember what happened with Lot?
Yep.
And he's going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, and Lot's down there. And this isn't even Abraham praying. But God actually says, should I withhold the information of what I'm about to do to Sodom and Gomorrah from Abraham? And then he goes and he tells him, I'm going to tell him what I'm going to do. Again, why? He said it's because he's the chosen one. He's the one I've picked to carry on and become my chosen people. I'm not going to hide what I'm doing from him. Kind of reminds me of that a little bit. I'm going to tell Daniel, he's praying in this instance, but I'm going to reveal to him what I'm going to do. It's kind of in the similar vein. So this actually led right after this to this famous, the 70 weeks of Daniel. Right after Gabriel shows up and starts explaining stuff to Daniel, boom, that's when you have this 70 weeks piece, which is a pretty famous part of the Bible, very controversial, somewhat confusing, but it's still a really important part of the Bible. And so that came right after this. So in this instance, I'm just thinking logistically, what had to happen? So you have Daniel praying. He's actually still praying when this happens. So he goes in and he starts praying, okay? God hears his prayer. Okay, I heard Daniel's prayer. He says, Gabriel, go to him. Help him understand. Give him revelation, whatever it is. And then that's where he ends up going and receiving the information. So logistically, Daniel prays, God hears, God sends an angel. Okay, that's kind of the walkthrough of what took place based on the text in Daniel 9. Okay, here's another one. So here's one in Luke chapter 1. You've probably heard this one as well. It happened that in the days of Herod, king of Judea, there was a certain priest, Zechariah by name, of the division of Abijah, and he and his wife were from the daughters of Aaron, and her name was Elizabeth. And they were both righteous in the sight of God, living blamelessly in all the commandments and regulations of the Lord. And they did not have a child because Elizabeth was barren, and they were both advanced in years. We've heard this story a time or two, haven't we? Whose parents are these two people? John the Baptist, okay? And it happened that while he was serving as priest before God in the order of his division, according to the custom of the priesthood, he was chosen by Lot to enter into the temple of the Lord to burn incense. And the whole crowd of the people were praying outside at the hour of the incense offering, and an angel of the Lord appeared to him standing at the right side of the altar of incense. Okay, what's he about to tell him?
He was going to have a child.
Yeah, you and Elizabeth are going to have a child, okay? Now here's what's interesting. And Zechariah was terrified when he saw the angel, and fear fell upon him. But the angel said to him, this is the really important piece. What does the angel say to him? Not just that you're going to have a baby. He says, do not be afraid, Zechariah, because your prayer has been heard. What were they praying about?
Having a child.
Probably having a child. We can't have a child. We've not been successful. God, please give us a child. And so what happens? Prayer offered. God hears it. And in this case, what does he do? He sends an angel. A lot of people think this was Gabriel. No, it's not necessarily by name, but he typically is the angel that goes and delivers the big messages. Who goes and talks to Mary? Gabriel. Who talked to Daniel? Gabriel. So you kind of have this lead messenger angel, it seems to go out. Archangel in this case. And he says, do not be afraid, Zechariah, because your prayer has been heard, and your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son, and you will call his name John. Okay, got it. So God felt like it was necessary in this case to kind of muster up the angelic host, at least Gabriel, and say, you're going to participate in an answered prayer here. Heard the prayer, here you go. Go to him. Now it's kind of interesting because Zechariah had been praying for a child, and God states he heard the prayer. So there was involvement from Zechariah in this one way or the other. God sent an angel to Zechariah. The angel, like Daniel, gave revelation, in this case, of the child. It wasn't the 70 weeks. It's, here's what's going to happen. 70 weeks are to go. No, here's what's going to happen. You're going to have a son, and his name's going to be John. And then he has a whole spiel he gives about what he's going to do. He's going to go before the Messiah. And that's what John ultimately does, right? John the Baptist would be the forerunner to Jesus. That was the key. Now, a couple things to note here. These prayers were directly in line with God's ultimate plan. It's important to note, not everybody gets an angel sent for every prayer request, okay? And the thing I kind of found was the line between these that seems to tie them together is there's a bigger thing going on here. When Daniel is told about what's going to happen, what's the big picture here that's going to take place? Got the coming back of the nation. Now that's part of that. They're leaving exile, they're returning to the land, the ultimate end purposes of God in Israel. And then in this case, he comes to Zechariah and he doesn't just say, oh, by the way, congratulations, you're going to have a child. What's he going to do? He's going to be the forerunner. He's going to be the one who ushers in the Messiah. Repent, the kingdom of God is at hand. This is a big deal, and it's in line with the ultimate plan that God has. So sometimes these things happen in this way because God's plan, ultimately, these are big pieces, and the angelic piece was necessary for some reason. Okay, but not everybody is going to have an angel show up and say, here, let me inform you of these things. Okay. These prayers from Zechariah and Daniel were also personal and heartfelt pleas. Would you agree with that? Yes. Now, we have the beauty of being able to read the whole story after the prayers went up in the text and say, we see the big picture. But if you're Daniel in your room and you're praying and you're in exile and you don't know what's going to take place, what's the heart of Daniel in that moment? God, I don't understand this. God, please help. God, forgive us for what we've done. What about Zechariah's prayer? Does he know what's coming when he's praying for a child with his wife? No. He's saying, we don't have kids. We would love to have a child. God, please allow this to happen. And so these are not just prayers to say, we got this all figured out. We know what's going to happen, and these are critical moments. They're just human beings praying as they're led because of their situation, because of where they are. And God uses it for bigger things ultimately. But he still hears their prayer, answers their prayer, and in this case actually sends an angel to deliver the good news, like the message of what's going to take place. Okay? Just important things to know. They were offered at a time when they lacked knowledge of the ultimate plan. That's important to note there. You're praying something today and you go, this seems really small, or it seems very personal, it's not going to have these worldwide implications. Maybe it is. I think these two were probably going, God, we just see a problem here, praying for their country, praying for their family, and yet what ultimately happened? Big things came from God answering these prayers that they probably didn't see big right off the bat. They just were focused on this tiny little thing, a small little piece. They were offered at a time when they didn't fully understand their ultimate involvement. So be careful when you throw a prayer up there, right? Because you don't know what that might lead to. If God says, hey, I've got a bigger thing than even what you're asking, you have no idea what I'm about to use this for. And then boom, here you have these huge things. These people are part of history now that will never be removed. Pretty amazing stuff. Not every prayer requires an angelic appearance in Revelation. Okay, so you have to be careful. We have a tendency to run one way or the other. And there are groups out there that think that we need to pray for this type of prayer response all the time. Like if I don't get an angel showing up and delivering it to me, I'm disappointed. That's not the point here. Okay, so there's a lot of prayers. In fact, the majority of prayers biblically did not get an angel showing up. Sometimes it happened. Most of the time it didn't. Why? That's God's call. We should not expect an angelic messenger to appear at every occasion of prayer. So just don't be disappointed if sometimes God says, I'm just going to talk to you in the quiet of your heart and I'm going to just speak to you. I don't necessarily have to have this bold, fearful angel standing next to you going, oh my goodness, what have I done? Scare the daylights out of you. It doesn't always work that way. In fact, most of the time it doesn't work that way. However, we can know that angelic engagement is happening on our behalf behind the scenes when we pray. So we don't see a fraction of what's going on behind the scenes. That's kind of the point with that. But there are angels that respond to prayer. God uses them to send them and do things. Matthew 18. See to it that you do not despise one of these little ones. You've heard this verse. He's actually got the children he calls in. And there's discussion over, is he talking about just kids? Or is he talking about little ones like those who are innocent in faith? Those who have a childlike faith when he says little ones. Okay? But he says here, do not despise one of these little ones, for I tell you that their angels in heaven constantly see the face of my Father who is in heaven. Isn't that interesting? What do you think? If a certain man had 100 sheep and one of them wanders away, will he not leave the 99 on the hills and go and look for the one that wandered away? So you see, it could be about kids, but I think it's bigger. I think it's broader. But he ties it to this wandering away. And so it's like, well, who's wandering away? What's the connection to the wandering away? Well, a young one who's innocent in faith gets lost, goes off here. God's got to go get them. They're special. Okay, and so there's two schools of thought on that. I think I even have a note on it. Here's what he continues to say. He says, and if he happens to find it, truly I say to you that he rejoices over it more than over the 99 that did not wander away. In the same way, it is not the will of your Father who is in heaven that one of these little ones perish. So kids, that's the illustration he uses. Could be kids, could be young believers. But the thing I wanted to point out was the fact that he mentions the angelic piece. About there are angels somehow engaged with these little ones, however you want to define it. They're engaged with this on their behalf. This does not state every believer has a guardian angel. That's not what this is saying. Some people will take this and say, oh, this is a guardian angel thing. Everybody has a guardian angel. That's not what this is saying. He's talking about the little ones having these angelic, could be protectors for a period of time. We don't really get a lot of details, do we? We just know that these angels that are assigned to these groups or these individuals are in front of God. What are they doing? It speaks of these little ones having spiritual advocates or entities before God that are somehow connected to them. We don't get a whole logistical detail of like, well, what's their job description? What do they do? We just know they are before God. So what could they be doing? Well, they could be interceding. They could be protecting. We don't really know. We don't really know. But clearly God makes a connection there. Look at this one in Luke 22. And he withdrew from them about a stone's throw and knelt down and began to pray, saying, Father, if you are willing, take away this cup from me. This is the Gethsemane prayer right before the crucifixion. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. And then what happens? An angel from heaven appeared to him, strengthening him. And what is he doing? He's praying. So Jesus is praying in the garden, and the response is, go strengthen him. An angel goes and strengthens him. Now, I read this and I'm going, an angel from heaven to strengthen Jesus? That seems a little unnecessary. Like, this is Jesus. So why was an angel sent to strengthen Jesus, the strongest of strong? He's still human. And it's encouraging. It gives you the strength to continue on, to know it's bigger than just the things of flesh, maybe. But apparently God felt it was necessary. In this case, an angel went and said, let's strengthen him. Because what's he praying? I mean, what's the prayer? Please don't let me have to go through this. Your will, not mine, but please let this cup pass from me. You see these instances where people are praying, even Jesus praying. And what's the response? Angelic engagement to strengthen, to encourage, some purpose of building them up, protecting them, something to that degree. Even Jesus had that happen, which kind of blew my mind when I read that. Here's a question. Should Christians pray for angelic assistance? Many Christians pray asking for angels to come, protect, or help, etc. Now, I don't think that's necessarily bad. It's just ultimately we have to understand our hierarchy correctly here, okay? And who we should be talking to, yeah. So here's Hebrews 1:14, just to kind of put it in context. Are they not all spirits engaged in special service, sent on assignment for the sake of those who are going to inherit salvation? Ministering spirits is what they're called. Now the key word here is sent. Okay? Who sends them? Okay, so they're sent by someone. And so I think that kind of defines, at least in my mind, am I going to pray for a specific angel? Angel so-and-so, Gabriel, please come and protect my, car ride to the mountains. No. Who are you going to pray to? God. And then he will be the one. And you could even pray to him and say, if you need to, send angels to protect me. But what are we ultimately getting at? We just want God to protect us. And do it in whatever way you see fit, but we know you do this biblically, so we might invoke that in a prayer. God, send your angels to protect us. There's nothing wrong with that. The problem is when we start saying, I'm going to pray not to God, who's in charge of the angels and sends them, but when we just go to angels directly. Okay, this is my problem with a lot of praying even to saints. It's a little bit different because it's not an angel, but they go to a lesser being for something that Christ died so you could go to the supreme being. I don't understand that. I don't know why you would take a step down when you could go right into the throne room. It doesn't make sense to me. And apparently it's, there's people who do it with angels too. Whether they do it unintentionally, they think that this is just something they can do. I would say that's not biblical to pray to an angel. Prayer should never be to angels, only to God. That's the key. He can determine if angelic engagement is needed. It's kind of like giving him the veto power. If you think an angel needs to go, do it. If you don't, God doesn't need an angel to do anything. I think we have to realize that. He could say, it's done. He doesn't need angels. He uses them because of his hierarchy, and that's the way he designed things to work. His mind, not ours, but he does use them that way. He uses them to encourage and do different things. Okay? There is no prayer in the Bible directed to an angel. So there's your support for that. No one prays to angels in the Bible. Even though they are sent in response to prayer, the prayers are always offered to God, and God ends up sending the angel, okay, in response to prayer. Revelation 22. And I, John, am the one who heard and saw who saw these things. And when I heard and saw them, I fell down to worship before the feet of the angel who showed these things to me. And he said to me, do not do that. I am your fellow slave and of your brothers the prophets and of those who keep the words of this book. Worship God. This angel is not Satan. Because what does he say? Do not worship me. I am just a ministering spirit, a worker alongside in a different realm. Okay, so absolutely not. He puts the hierarchy in the right place. You go to God. That's where you should be focused. Okay. Now Daniel chapter 10. We're going to continue on a little bit in Daniel. In those days, Daniel, I myself was in mourning for 3 whole weeks. I had not eaten any choice food, and meat and wine did not enter my mouth, did not use any ointment until the end of the 3 whole weeks. And then on the 24th day of the first month, I myself was on the bank of the great river that is the Tigris. Okay, so he's fasting and probably praying. And I lifted up my eyes, and I saw, and there was a man, and he was dressed in linen, and his waist was girded with the gold of Uphaz. There's debate on who this person is, so I'm going to fast forward a little bit. And I saw, Daniel alone, the vision. The people who were with me did not see the vision. Nevertheless, the great trembling fell upon them, and they fled in order to hide themselves. And I myself, Daniel, alone saw this great vision, and as a result, no strength was left in me. My complexion grew deathly pale, did not retain any strength. And I heard the sound of his words. And when I heard the sound of his words, I myself began falling into a trance on my face, with my face to the ground. And look, a hand touched me, and it roused me to my knees and the palms of my hands. And he said to me, Daniel, a man beloved, pay attention to the words that I am speaking to you, and stand upright where you are, for I have now been sent to you. There it is again. And while he was speaking with me this word, I stood up trembling. Okay, so he's getting another one of these. Here's somebody to come and talk to him. And he said to me, you must not fear, Daniel, for from the first day that you set your heart to understand and to humble yourself before your God, your words were heard. What does that sound like? He's praying. He prayed. And what does it say? I myself have come. Period? Because of your words, he says. So Daniel's praying and fasting and going through all this stuff, and God says, I hear his prayer, and because of his words, go to him. But in this case, Daniel's praying, and God says, I heard your words, and have sent Gabriel, or whoever this is, the angel of the Lord, some people say, to go to him because of the prayer, because of his pleas and his words. Okay. This angelic figure states he came because of Daniel's words on this one. Isn't that interesting? You pray, and God says, I'm sending an angel because you asked, you prayed, and I'm giving this to you. It doesn't have to do that. Daniel 10:13, while he was speaking with me this word, I stood up trembling, and he said to me, you must not fear, Daniel, for from the first day that you set your heart to understand and to humble yourself before God, your words were heard. He's been hearing him for a while, hasn't he? Now it's time. Go to him. Then he goes on to say this, but the prince of the kingdom of Persia stood before me for 21 days. And look, Michael, one of the chief princes, came to assist me, and I left him there beside the king of the Persians. Now this is where you get a little behind the scenes information. Daniel is praying. God sends this angelic figure to him because of the prayer and his words. But it wasn't an easy trip, was it? This angel was doing something, engaged in something when it comes to the king of the Persians. And what happens?
There was warfare in the spiritual realm.
There's warfare. and he says, I have to go to Daniel. And he's there, and he says, basically there's only one person who came to assist me, and who is it? Michael the archangel says, I'm going to go assist. You've got work to do. I have to almost like relieve you. So there's a lot of maneuvering of troops in heaven that God carries out in this war that's going on. He could just say the word and it's all done. Sometimes I wonder why he doesn't just do that. It seems like the easiest thing, but that's not how God operates. He wants participation with him. He doesn't need us, but he says, I want you to participate. I want you to be involved. He even does it in the spiritual realm too with the angelic host. I want you to participate. I want you involved. And in this case, there's a little crossover. Now, ironically, who are they fighting here? Who's Michael go to fight? King of the Persians. Now, we're not given a name here, but it's a spiritual entity most likely. That's who this being is that's overseeing. Now, where's the Persian Empire?
Middle East.
Where's it at? It's in the news. Iran is the Persian Empire. That is the Persians, just so you know. Okay? So back then, who's battling against God's people and against God in the spiritual realm? The Persians. Isn't it interesting? 2,000 years more than that, because this is Daniel's day. 2,500 years plus later, there's still a war between the king of the Persians and the people of God. Isn't that crazy? It's interesting, as Melissa and I were talking about this last night as we were watching the news, and these bombs that were dropped by the U.S. on the Persians, and or I should say the Iranians, okay? They're the Persians. And who's in charge of Iran right now? Who is the highest authority in Iran?
The religious leader,
The Ayatollah, okay? And he is a religious, basically a cleric of Allah, okay? He's not just a secular political figure. He's a spiritual leader who is the head of that country. But here's the thing I mentioned, and Melissa and I were talking about last night, is I said, when you think about this and you go back into Daniel's day, there was this constant theme in the Old Testament, which is Yahweh against the gods of the nations and Israel against the people of these other nations. Now, when you look at what's happening today with the Iran-Israel conflict, and you go to Iran and you think about their Ayatollah, who does he claim he speaks for? Who is his God? Now, I think personally there's a crisis of faith over there today. Now, I don't know this definitively, but I want you to think of this from a spiritual angle. If you believe that you're supposed to wipe out the little Satan and the big Satan because Allah has told you, and remember, he's a religious head, that this is what you're going to do. And he says, I'm going to do it and nothing can stop me because no one can overcome Allah. And he says, I don't have to negotiate. I'll enrich and I will get the means by which I can remove the little and the great Satan. And he's religiously inclined that way. What happens when the very nation of Yahweh comes in with an ally and destroys the means by which you are going to do that? How does that affect you supernaturally from your deity? Either Allah's judging us or Yahweh is bigger than Allah. That's what you have to come to the conclusion of if you're this religious zealot over there. So what's he thinking today? Oh, this is just a setback. Allah's not ready yet. But I think in these days, they would have taken this as, think about it. Baal and Yahweh had a contest. Who's the bigger? Who's greater? Who won that one? Yahweh did. What's happening now? And who won? The nations that say Yahweh is our God, not the nations that say Allah is our God. I think it's the same messaging that was happening back here. We don't look at it from that spiritual angle. If you're a Persian today and you're standing there going, well, this Ayatollah's been telling us Allah's going to give us the victory. Sure doesn't look like we're closer to that today. What are you going to do? Maybe you start to wonder. Maybe that God's bigger. And it's a bigger plan. And you're right. Change of leadership is probably something that they may say, okay, this guy's not speaking. He's not in the right place. Allah's mad. Get him out of there. We need somebody else. Who knows what they're thinking? But I can tell you that if this event would have taken place in the Old Testament, based on what I read, it would have been a very clear triumph for Yahweh, slap in the face for the God of the Persians. Happened in Babylon, happened everywhere. Because God is ultimately that has to teach the nations that I only let you go as far as I want you to go. But I'm in charge, not your gods. And I think that's ultimately what he's saying to many today. So is there a bigger thing happening behind the scenes? I think so. I don't know if anybody watched the address last night, but it was really interesting because I've never heard a president say, we love God. Now maybe he was just,
I think he said, we love you, God.
we love you, God. And then he said, thank you for basically protect our troops, protect the Middle East, protect the... Again, I don't know. You can think what you want about Trump, but I also know in the New Testament you have high priests that were evil men that were said they spoke because of who they were in the position at the time. When they said one man should die for the good of the nation, he said that. Caiaphas is not a good guy, but he still spoke prophetically because he was the head of the temple. He was the high priest. So take what you want to say, but I think there's something going on behind the scenes here that we're only seeing a surface piece of it, personally. Okay. Daniel goes on and says, and he touched me again, the one in the form of a human, he strengthened me, and he said, you must not fear, O beloved man. Peace be to you. Be strong, be courageous. And when he spoke with me, I was strengthened, and I said, let my Lord speak, for you have strengthened me. Then he asked, do you know why I have come to you? Is it interesting how an angel shows up, and either it's Jesus praying in the garden, and an angel shows up and it strengthens him, and what happens here with Daniel? Angel shows up, strengthens him. Really in what could be like a hopeless situation. We're in exile, it's bad, right?
First of all, scared him to death.
Scared him to death, right. That's exactly right. Now look what he tells him. He says, and now I return to fight against the prince of Persia. I've come and I needed to do was strengthen you, and now I'm going back to fight. He says, and I myself am going, and look, the prince of Yavin, which literally means Greece, will come. So this is another spiritual entity he's talking about, probably related to Alexander the Great, because that was the next thing that was about to take place when the Persians were about to get taken out.
Right.
And however, I will tell you what is inscribed in the book of truth, and there is not one who contends with me against these beings except Michael, your prince. The prince of Israel is Michael in the sense of they apparently there might have been some like, here's your this is your scope area, Michael. You look after this group. Oh, by the way, you look after this group, you look after this group. Michael was understood by the Israelites as being their guardian angel or their angelic representative in the heavenly places, an archangel by the name of Michael, who you've heard of. There's not very many archangels mentioned in the Bible. Michael's one of them. These are not all-knowing, everywhere entities like God is. They have limited capacity. They can be there or there. They can't be both places at the same time. And they're not God. So I want to just talk about this really. That's a little bit of a side note, but I think it's really interesting. There's this understanding in the Bible of these, quote, territorial spirits. Okay, now it sounds weird, but a lot of it comes right out of Daniel here, where you have these entities that are basically connected to a specific area in the world. Okay, in this case, like the king of Persia, spiritual entity. And so there's questions on, we don't get a big insight into this, but Scripture does support that there are these beings that are over specific groups, nations, kings, kingdoms, okay? And there's good biblical evidence for territorial spirits. I'm going to show you another one here in just a second. Evil entities over a nation or a land. Maybe there's some that are, we could say, good entities. They're good and they've been assigned to an area and their job is to administer it, and they've done a good job. And maybe there's some really bad ones that have done a bad job, like, hey, you should worship us instead of Yahweh. I know, we know God is God, but we want worship. That's where Satan lost it, right? A couple of examples. What about Egypt during the Exodus? Good entities overseeing Egypt or bad ones? Literally, God had to go in there and use a plague to destroy every single one of those gods of Egypt. If you were in my Exodus when we went through that, remember how the plagues all connected with gods of Egypt? So what's he trying to say? These are not me. I'm more powerful than Egypt, and these are my people. You will let them go when I say you will let them go. And I will show you repeatedly. And also, they had magicians that did some pretty crazy stuff. So they were empowered to a level to probably capture the people's attention. Well, our magicians will come out and take care of this, until they had to make life flies from the dust. Then they were like, well, we can't do that. We have to tap out. God's the only one who can create life from nothing. And they were done. They were out. So what about the Persians or the Greeks as expressed by Daniel? Alexander the Great, Darius the Mede, then you get even into the Romans. I mean, it just continues on. They all appear to have some kind of a backing spiritual entity that was driving or continuing to do things. It's called cosmic geography. You see it in the Bible in instances where the people of the Old Testament believed that area was under a certain dominion of a certain deity. Okay, I've used this example. We've talked about it in here before. Remember the guy who comes and sees Elijah because his hand's crippled, and he asks for 2 donkey loads of dirt after he gets his hand fixed?
Oh, yeah.
Remember? And he says, can I just take a couple donkey loads of dirt back home with me? The reason he's doing that is because he knows that's Yahweh's dirt. It's under his dominion. So I'm going to set up a place here where I can worship Yahweh, even though I'm in an area of land that's under a different dominion.
He wanted some holy ground.
I want holy ground. I want Yahweh's land to worship on. That's how they understood this. And I don't think it's really changed a lot. We just de-spiritualize it. We don't think about it that way anymore. That's how they understood it. Deuteronomy 29, look at this. All the nations will say, why has Yahweh done such a thing to the land? This is when he's warning them, like, hey, don't fall into idolatry. I'll drive you out of my land. Remember? What caused the fierceness of this great anger? And they will say it's because they abandoned the covenant of Yahweh, the God of their ancestors, which he made with them when he brought them out from the land of Egypt. And they went and they did what? Served other gods, bowed down to them. Now here's a weird phrase. Gods whom they did not know, who they did not know them, and he had not allotted to them. Isn't that kind of a weird statement? These are my people. They are mine. I am their God. There's going to be other entities over other nations. They should be leading people back to me, but they're not doing that. What are they doing? They're wanting worship. Egypt, Ra, Osiris, Isis, you name it. There's probably all these entities out there, evil angelic beings, or I shouldn't say angels. They're basically these demonic forces. And what do they want? What Satan wants.
They want control.
I want worship. I want to be God. And so they go and they have these they're little gods, little g, over these little areas. And they have to deal and contend with Yahweh at times because he comes through and he says, by the way, let my people go. They should not be enslaved here. The time is up. And then what does he do? Embarrasses the gods, little g, of Egypt, and takes them out of there. They cannot overcome Yahweh. That's really what the whole Old Testament is. Yahweh against the gods, Israel against the nations. That's the Old Testament in a nutshell. That's really what it is. Leviticus 16, and Aaron shall present the sin offerings bull. This is the Day of Atonement, which is for himself. And so he shall make atonement for himself and for his family, and he shall take the 2 goats, and he shall present them before Yahweh at the tent of assembly's entrance. So they're going to have a sacrifice to Yahweh, and they have the sin offering where they put the hands on it and put the sins of the people as kind of what the symbolic nature is on the other goat. Okay. Then Aaron shall cast lots for the 2 goats. 1 lot for Yahweh, 1 for what?
Azazel.
Who's Azazel?
Satan.
The spirit of the area.
He was a demonic entity they believe lived in the wilderness where they were traveling. This is not an offering to him, just for the record. This is not we have to make sure that we serve this God in this way. They're putting the sin on in a lot of translations you'll say the scapegoat. The goat who goes away. In the original, it's the goat for Azazel. And what they're saying is, we're putting the sin on this goat, and then what do they do with that goat?
Send it back to where it belongs.
Kick it out into the wilderness because that's where the sin belongs, is with that guy. Give him what he's owed, which is the sin. Now I'm going to show you something with that in just a second. But he must present alive before Yahweh the goat in which the lot for Azazel fell to make atonement for himself, to send it away into the desert to Azazel. So this idea of territorial spirits or beings in certain areas is not new. Think about Jesus wandering around in Israel at the time, and he goes up to Samaria, and what does he run into a lot of? People possessed by these different beings, these different spirits. He has to cast them out. Look at this in Matthew 4. Now, what are they doing here in Leviticus first? What's going on in this moment? What's the big event? Day of Atonement, one time a year, sacrifice to Yahweh. The sacrifice is given to pay for the sins. They cast the sins into the wilderness. Follow me? Matthew 4, then Jesus was led into the wilderness by the Spirit to be tempted by the devil, and he had fasted 40 days and 40 nights, and he was hungry. You think there's a connection here?
Oh, yeah.
This is messaging. And where does Jesus go when he encounters the devil?
In the desert.
And where were the Israelites traveling when they ran into Azazel? You see the connection? And so there's a lot of belief that this Azazel is kind of another name for the devil, for Satan, as that concept developed all the way into the New Testament. It was, who is this being that seems to be deserving of the sin? He's responsible. That is in the wilderness, the destitute places, the places where people don't live. That's where he resides. Right? That's what they understood anyway. So where does Jesus go? Why didn't he just go into town and get tempted by the devil? I'm sure there's a lot of temptations when you're going downtown. No, he's out in the middle of nowhere. It's the wilderness is the key. This is connected to that event. This is connected to the wilderness wandering that they did for 40 days or 40 years. How long is Jesus in the wilderness? You don't think that there's reasons for this? This is messaging. Okay? And Jesus said to him at the very end of the thing, he says, go away, Satan, for it's written, you shall worship the Lord your God and serve him only. The devil left him, and what happens? Angels came and began ministering to him. Isn't this interesting? Sounds like the garden again. Goes and does this thing. God says angels. Mark 9. And when Jesus saw that a crowd was running together, he rebuked the unclean spirit, saying to it, mute and deaf spirit, I command you, come out of him and enter into him no more. And it came out screaming and convulsing him greatly. And he became as if he were dead, so that most of them said, oh, he's died. Remember when he does this for this guy's son? But Jesus took hold of his hand and raised him up, and he stood. And after he had entered into the house, his disciples asked him privately, why were we not able to expel it? And he said to them, this kind can only come out by nothing except by what? Prayer. See, now we got from prayer and God sends an angel to now, in order to get these evil entities, he'd authorized these guys to do this. And they said, how come we couldn't do it? And he says, you didn't pray. You got to pray. So does prayer affect the realm that we cannot see?
Yes.
The good guys and the bad guys? Absolutely. Absolutely it does. A lot of times we just don't see these things. Here's the bottom line. Prayer has an impact on the spiritual realm. Hopefully you've got that across today. I think you can go turn the news on and kind of see this stuff happening. See this stuff. Make the connections. And I think history, when it's like the Bible, when we look back on this in 50 years, I wonder what we'll say. I wonder if we'll have the picture where we'll be able to say, wow, I can see what God was doing. Think about this. I listened to the news just for a little bit last night. And there was a gal that came on and she was talking about this, and she says, I'm trying to wrap my head around this stuff that's going on in Israel and Iran. And she said, it wasn't that long ago that someone took a shot and came this close to killing this man. And this man just took out nuclear facilities that could have ultimately been attempted to wipe a whole nation or multiple nations off the face of the earth. You don't think there's divine involvement in this stuff?
Oh, yeah.
Take it for what it's worth. The means, the instrument's what we focus on a lot of time. The guy, the instrument. So is there stuff going on behind the scenes that we can't see? I think so. And I think 50 years from now, maybe more, our kids, my kids, they might grow up and look back and say, wow, I can actually see what was going on. Like we can read our New Testament and the whole picture, we can say, I think I see what was going on. Daniel didn't know when he was praying. Neither did Zechariah when they were praying. But we have the benefit of reading the whole story and looking back and saying, we see God's hand in all that. And they just were offering prayers because of what was going on in their world. When we were praying for our country, when we're praying for Israel, when we're praying for these things, we've been doing that just here in our church like crazy. You don't think things are happening? They're happening. They're absolutely happening behind the scenes.